All right, when I came here, Greece was in the grips of a military junta. A group of colonels had revolted against the government for fear that it might go left. This was at the time of the Cold War. And the CIA was urgently concerned that Greece be a bulwark of democracy because Piraeus was the home of the Sixth Fleet. What would happen if a communist government came into power in Greece? And so the CIA financed this coup by a bunch of extremely right-wing army officers. The king fled in disgrace because he didn't want to have anything to do with the coup and has never been brought back. So I guess we can say the coup introduced constitutional democracy, which eventually turned out to be good. But it wasn't good while they were here, believe me. Suddenly the right-wing element of the Orthodox Church came into power, and there was all of this, everybody goes to church. If you're not Orthodox, you can't marry in Greece, da-da-da-da-da, 100 rules, and the colonels themselves acted like strict mothers. For example, in the dumbest ways. For example, in Greek tavernas, it used to be the habit that if you really liked the dancing, if the dancing was good, you would go, oppa, and break a plate. Breaking a plate was a sign that you really liked what was going on. It was automatically added to your bill. Everybody expected it. The guy didn't rush out and go, my God, you've broken my plates. He had a stack of 500 plates back there just waiting to be broken. But for some reason, the colonels decided that this was extraordinarily wasteful and, I don't know, sort of emotionally immature. And they said there will be no more breaking of plates. And dumb things like that, as well as the complex things of having police agents all over the island listening in. So if anybody said anything criticizing the government, they were brought in for questioning. It was like, you know, Gestapo. It was disgusting. Almost all civil liberties were suspended. It was a form of military law. And eventually it ended with a revolt by the university students, of whom 58, I believe, were killed on the streets of Athens, under tanks. Until the people finally got it through their heads what was going on. They stopped saying, well, we needed some law and order. And then they found out what law and order was really like. So anyway, when I got here, the colonels had been in power for 4 or 5 years. Everybody's thoroughly sick of it. And the colonels realized that themselves, and so they decided to offer some concessions. They had had political prisoners in jail since they came into office. Not people who had done anything recently, but people who were suspected of having done something in the distant past. Among these was Manos Katrakis. Do you remember I showed you a slide of a little old actor doing Prometheus Bound? Okay. Manos Katrakis had been the rising star of Greece during the 1930s. He'd made some movies, but mostly he'd played all of the major roles for the Greek National Theatre Company. Although he was a small man, he had a magnificent, commanding voice and a laser presence. You just couldn't avoid it. And then came the Second World War, and he went into hiding in the hills. And the hills he happened to be in hiding in, the guerrillas were communists. So he joined that group of communists. He fought against the Nazis bravely. He was one of his nation's heroes. But at the end of the Second World War, there came the Civil War between the right and the communists, and suddenly he was on the wrong side. And when the communists were overthrown, he was put in prison. So he was there for 5 years until there was a general amnesty, and everybody realized that most of the people who were in prison were just patriots who happened to be on the wrong side of the mountain. And they were released, and he resumed his career, having lost about 15 years of his career. So he's now a man in his 40s, and he immediately rises to the top of his profession. He is now a thoroughly mature actor, and he's able to do all the big roles, the Oedipus Rex and Creonce and so forth. And then the colonels come into power, and back into jail he goes for another 7 years. So he's released finally. He's now in his 60s. A little, old, wizened up, bald man. He weighs maybe 90 pounds soaking wet. Wrinkled. At the same time, the colonels decided to permit the National Theatre to present Prometheus Bound. And this was trumpeted in all the Greek newspapers. And of course, all the tourists and people living here, like myself, went, what do you mean? And the Greeks said, well, of course they haven't permitted Prometheus Bound to be produced ever since they took power. Like, duh. And I still didn't get it, even though I'd read Prometheus Bound. But I went to the opening night. The National Theatre had the courage to hire Manos Katrakis to play Prometheus. And the tourists see this little wizened guy come out between force and might, and they go, interesting casting. But as soon as he's fastened to the rock and he starts speaking this magnificent voice, they go, oh, I get it, he's hired because he's a good speaker. And as I said, all these very primitive things happen. Different characters come on and go off. And he stands there and bemoans his fate, and everybody goes, it's another evening of Greek theater. Oh, I should have mentioned that since it was the opening of, it's the same performance we'll be going to, that is the opening of the season at Epidavros, all of the colonels were there in their limousines and with their guards, sitting in the front row, just like the priests and the magistrates of old. And halfway through the play, Hermes comes up to Prometheus and says, Zeus knows that you're the only person who knows his fate. And if you will tell him his fate so that he can avoid it, he'll free you. Otherwise, he can keep you here forever. And Katrakis says, in modern Greek, I have seen tyrants come, and I have seen tyrants go, and I am still here. Every Greek in the audience leaps to their feet, and they're all going, Eleftheria, which means freedom. The guards are going like this with their AK-47s, trying to mow down the whole audience, you know. The colonels stand up and look around like this. This goes on and on. This riot continues, and all the tourists are going, what's happening, what's happening? And my friends are saying to me, they're out. The colonels are done. And we all stand up and cheer, and the colonels get into their cars and drive away. And I can't tell you what I'm crying about. It was like seeing Aeschylus reach down from heaven and go, you, out. That play had exactly that immediate current political power. The colonels had been very wise not to permit its playing during their time, and it was very stupid of them to permit it. And the opposition took full advantage of it, and 2 weeks later, the colonels were out of power. They simply vanished into the woodwork. It was an exciting moment in modern Greek history, I can tell you, and it was strictly triggered by that play. Now, the other half of that experience, that same year I did Lysistrata for the first time.